Hello and welcome to Legal Thinking from RWK Goodman with myself, Ed Wootton, and my co-host Liam Pape.
Hello.
Yeah, so how are you, Liam?
Oh, I'm really actually quite sad, actually. I've started a business and a company, but I'm struggling to attract and retain talent. Yes, if only there was a 30-minute long interview that I could listen to learn a little bit more about how I could put together a value proposition for my employees that would help make my company better.
You know, Liam, funnily enough, I think I might have something for you. And it might end with a very, very good, brief bit of advice. We brought on Oscar Sadler, who's from Wiser, which is an employer branding agency. We have our very own Amanda Dow, who's director of HR, and Rich White, who's a partner in our employment team. And they all had a chat about exactly what you're having trouble with, Liam. It's the employee value proposition
Excellent.
that companies might want to develop.
Let's roll tape.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. Hopefully we'll have an interesting discussion about EVP. I guess my first question is to Oscar. What on earth is EVP and why do employers need it?
What a fantastic question. Start with the big hitters. There are kind of two answers to this, Ed, to be honest. The kind of brand and marketing / recruity answer, and the way that we would refer to it inside of Wiser, is your EVP answers the question of what's in it for me, for talent. So it needs to be really obvious when any sort of prospective employees or the people that you have inside of your business understand your offering. Because it's unbelievably competitive, like especially at the moment, more than ever. I think candidates have the most power in terms of their decision of where they go to work more than ever. So you need to have a really clear differentiator between yourselves and the competition. And that really starts with the language that you use to describe yourself. Is kind of what's your offering, and that can be boiled down to a narrative and to a tagline, and most companies would refer to that tagline as your employer value proposition. So something like Spotify is one that we look to all the time because I hope that we all know what Spotify does, and that their EVP is join the band, no solo artists. And like what that tells you is that there's no ego, that it's extremely collaborative, and that once you come, you're going to be valued and listened to. And that's their kind of the core messaging. That's what's up on offer. Does that make sense? From like a recruitment marketing perspective, fab.
Yeah,
there's also I had like a very interesting conversation actually the other day where I was with a load of accountants, and one of the clients that I manage, one of them is like quite a large accountancy firm in the UK. And we just done an EVP exercise, and we sort of like were launching this new message. And then there was an email from one of their rural branches in like the north of Wales, where there's about sort of five employees. And they sent in and they were like, I don't understand any of this. Like, why would we need a new brand or a new message when people know us and know what it's like to sort of work with us? And we had to think of like a different way to describe what an EVP was. And I think it's almost helpful to think of it as kind of in like brand terms. So the way that we describe it to them is it's very similar for like a personal brand. I don't know if I was going to say who has like a really strong personal brand, who would you say?
Well, I guess he's in the news at the moment. Elon Musk. I don't like his personal brand, but it exists.
He definitely has. He definitely has a personal brand. If I was going to boil down Elon Musk's sort of personal brand, it would be like space and tech, probably. But when someone has like a really strong personal brand, they're not just known for being known. So for this like accountancy firm in the north of Wales, their personal brand is everything. It's about trust and being reliable. It's why the community knows who they are and why they work with them and why they've worked with them for so long. If you think about your employer brand and you as an employer, it's exactly the same thing, but instead of working with you, it's about working for you. So for something like, that's a kind of an easy way to think about the pivot. It's like if your company had a personal brand, what are the two or three things that they would think of and go, Royds Whitty King, they are trustworthy and reliable, but what does that mean for you as an employer? So there's two different ways of thinking about it.
So it's more than the kind of listing on your job advert that you've got a pool table and some like breakout areas, that kind of stuff in a really friendly office. It's the very core of who you are. And I guess like you've kind of alluded to it a bit there, but I guess I'll move this over to Amanda. How can employers like us, when this podcast goes out, will be RWK Goodman, how can we kind of define our EVP for people that are joining or want to join, or even existing employees? What is the challenge? How have we done that?
Okay, so how we do that for ourselves? I mean, we've got a lot of literature on our website. We've got a lot of material, a lot of touch point documents that we use to send out to our candidates. So right from the very beginning of the candidate experience, the candidate journey, there's just a whole series of consistent messages that we look to iterate through the process, right through to the stage that they join us, when hopefully everything that they've heard, everything that we've said, everything they've seen and read actually comes to life, and their real experience is what they've seen and what they've heard. So as I say, there's a whole host of things, whether it's a touch point with a recruiting manager, whether it's a touch point in our HR team, whether it's a onboarding letter that a candidate's been sent. Everything should have a kind of a look and feel, so when they join us, that it's really clear that this is the place that we've lived up to throughout the whole of the experience they've had pre-joining. Yeah.
And is that the same across the board, Oscar, with everyone that you've worked with? Is it always the same kind of stuff? It's like getting the literature right and the messaging right, or is there, sometimes firms that have to do more work in different areas, or?
Yeah, I mean, I was loving everything you were saying there, Amanda. I think like consistency is like the main thing. And you're chatting about there in terms of expectation, meeting reality. That's sort of exactly it. And so it starts with words and with your narrative and with the right literature. So what's the top of the job description and what they see on a career site. But that, it goes out to all things in terms of what are the videos that you might send to someone, or what promises are you making around diversity and inclusion through the reports that you have, or the videos and sort of static assets like pictures and photos that you're putting up there. Are you selling a false dream? Really. So the more that can reflect the reality of the company, the better, sort of stronger and more consistent your EVP is, and therefore more consistent your employer brand is. So was loving everything. Yeah, you were saying there, Amanda. I think it does start for sure with language and with narrative. Yeah.
I'm going to be a little bit skeptical, if I may.
As always.
Go on, Liam.
So essentially my question is, how can you ensure that this is adding value? Because don't all companies want to boast that they work as a team and everyone works hard? And so I know, for example, that Barclays has something called the 5 pillars, and that's about like respect, integrity, resilience. But surely other banks, such as HSBC, also have respect, integrity, resilience. Aren't these just buzzwords?
Don't know.
What wonderful!
I'll let you go first, Oscar.
Go on, Amanda. You're off the starting block, so I'll sit back.
I think it's really interesting, and I guess I can speak probably from the journey we've been on very recently on our EVP journey, and I think that it is really hard to really look for ways to differentiate. But I think for me, there's a massively close link back to values, and I think for me, an EVP and your values are so interlinked, and I think there's a different. Some businesses might use the same words, but do their actions speak to the words? So I think that's part of it, is the lived experience, I guess, which some people won't know until they're part of something. So I think that will be some of my thinking around it. There might be similar words, but how is that actually brought to life, and so when they say integrity, how do they do it? How do they do business? How do they show integrity with their clients? How do they show integrity with their staff? And does that actually play out in reality? So for me, it's more than the words, it's the bringing to life of the words and what that actually means relevant to that particular business. But I think in addition to that, I guess you're looking at trying to find something that is different, that does stand out, that does make you have a bit of a USP. So I guess in an EVP, that's always something you are trying to understand, and looking at what your competitors are doing is really important. But it is key that I can't help but go back to the same thing, that you can look at your competitors, but you've got to make sure that it's true, it's authentic, and it's genuine. So that would be some of my thoughts. Oscar, you've obviously got a lot of experience in this. This is your bag. So yeah, keen to hear what your view on it is.
Because it sounds like it's your bag as well, Amanda. I think it's so fair to be skeptical, Liam, because it could be it's kind of like everything in marketing, right? It's kind of if something feels a bit too like forced or fake, or like you're being sold something, then you start to like disbelieve it. And I think it comes down to, like, the answer to your question is the reason why employer branding is like such a new thing. So it's only been really around as a kind of industry for 10 years-ish, maybe. And especially over the last 8 months, it started to get more and more prevalent as like the market has gotten more competitive. Because what you were saying, Liam, in terms of as different banks, might have exactly the same kind of core messages, I agree with Amanda that that's really like down to values. And there's a big difference between your values and your EVP. So your EVP is something that you want it to be authentic but aspirational. You want it to like motivate people, to inspire anybody looking at you and thinking, wow, that sounds like a great place to work. And anybody inside of your business to say, yeah, like I buy into this, and I buy into this vision and what you're kind of promising me. Your values are guiding behaviors. They should be things that you can use and you can look to for how should we act, how should we make decisions. If that's things like integrity and collaboration, those are the most buzzwordy like HR terms ever. But for some banks, they're really important. Is that like integrity is something that you would also want to talk to your clients about and say that this is how we act and we collaborate, so there are no silos, across markets, etc. But in terms of your people, is like, what does integrity mean to to the way you, I don't know, to the promise of your people? Is that like something that you would want to aspire to be? It's not a very enticing pull when someone is looking at 5 different banks and thinking, which one should I work at? Because they're all pretty much the same in terms of the opportunity that I'm going to get. So what you need to do is you need to find out that your absolute USP, something that you have that is absolutely true, that you can shout about to the high heavens that others don't. And that's the clincher. That's your EVP. You can have the same values as loads of other people, but that core message, that core reason needs to be something different.
So you need a USP for your EVP is what I'm hearing here. a lot of
yeah, exactly. Especially if you're B2B. No, yeah.
Can I just chip in?
Sure.
So I think what I was interested in, Oscar said there, and I completely understand this as someone who's recruiting at the moment, and we've recruited over the past few years, and talking to other people in the firm at Royce Billy King who are recruiting is, compared to even a few years ago, but let alone when I started a long time ago, the recruitment process has changed massively. Many years ago, it used to be that a candidate was grilled and was almost, in a sense, kind of, you need to be grateful that you're going to come and get a job with such a great firm. It's much more of a two-way street now. Candidates want to understand, who am I going to work for? Why would I want to come and work for you? So employers have to do a lot more, and ever more so in the last, I think you said 8 months, Oscar, yeah, absolutely. The last sort of 6, 8, 12 months, couple of years to actually to help people understand why would I want to come and work for your organization? Why would I enjoy working here? What's different about it? And it is hard. It is difficult sometimes to explain why we're different, from other law firms, or why I've got some clients in the sort of the area of software development, and it's really challenging to recruit at the moment because, there's lots of people looking to recruit and not enough software developers, to fill all those vacancies. So why would I want to come and work for you? What's different? And that's the that's the bit that's changed, in my view, I think, over the past few years.
Yeah, and you say it's kind of a recent, more recent development in the last 5-10 years that EVP has become more important, but also obviously in the last 20-25 years, the internet has become a bigger thing. Social media, when you put yourself out there with your own, you're saying this is who we are. There's more people, there's people like Liam who are just the cynics who just want to question everything you do, and then there's people who maybe have a grievance or want to have had a negative experience with you. Rich, what is your experience like? Are people or employers way more cautious now about how they handle grievances and things like that than they ever have been before because they've got their EVP that they've got to protect, or is it the same as it ever was? What's the situation now that EVP exists?
It's a good point that everything is much more accessible. Things aren't as confidential as they used to be, are they? I mean, you've got sites like Glassdoor that people will regularly look at reviews of employers and what people who leave might say, and you probably get more of the disgruntled people sometimes going on and posting comments than perhaps some of the people who've left your organisation who are really happy. But you've also got things like employment tribunal judgments. Every judgment these days is published online. So if you're continually getting sued for discrimination, people will find that in 5 minutes online when they're looking and doing their research into your organisation. So I'm not sure necessarily that makes a huge difference to how you might deal with a grievance internally, but you have to be conscious, I guess, as an employer that whilst you need to do everything you can to promote your EVP and help people understand what it is, there's always going to be negative messages that are and bad information in a sense about any organization that's published, because not everybody has exactly the same experience. So it's trying to make sure in a sense that you do your best to keep those bad sort of messages to a minimum by living up to your EVP, but also promoting all the positive stuff that as an organization you might be doing.
Yeah. And Oscar, is it, I guess, from your experience, is it ever a good thing to come at doing your kind of working out your EVP from a defensive position, as it were?
Yes, sometimes it's pretty necessary. I agree with what Rich said. I mean, there's just so much. It's more transparent now. And also, if something like those tribunals that you were mentioning there doesn't affect the kind of negative image externally, it can certainly do that internally with just people's sentiment of feeling like, oosh, do I want to work for a company that does that? And do I want to still work here? I think we have, over the past 6 months, pre-COVID, almost all the work that we were doing at Wiser was around defining EVPs and then building an employer brand to recruit. It was all about attraction. Now, I'd say over the past sort of 7-8 months, about 50% of the work that we've got coming in is about retention. Is about people leaving and the sort of the state of play of that is, I think a crazy stat is that 1 in 2 people this year, it was a survey that was taken from about 50,000 people in the UK, 1 in 2 people are planning on leaving their job. So that kind of retention, it's a bit of a crisis, the whole great reshuffle, etc. So retaining your people and making sure that you're true to your word is like more important than ever. We recently, I don't know, did anybody see the press article sort of like 8 months ago about Brewdog and about their disgruntled employees?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. There are many disgruntled employees.
There are many, they even branded themselves, they gave themselves a name, Punks with Purpose. That was quite a huge thing that I feel like in our mind, in recruitment marketing world, there are a couple of brands that feel untouchable. Someone like Brewdog, Patagonia would be like another one where it feels like they are so cool and different and sort of like striving for the common man, if you want to put it, and doing something with a purpose. And then these guys sort of came along, Punks with Purpose came along and effectively said, this is a facade. And you're not being, you're sort of lying to people and you're not showcasing what it's really like to work there. And so we reviewed it. So we started working with their leadership team, and it was one of the largest research projects that we've done to date, to build out a new value proposition and just say, and sense check it from a non-biased position. Just say, are these claims true? What does this mean for your employer brand? And then where does that now lead? Thankful to say that not all of those claims are true at all. They've got a lot of work to do, but it's now going to result in building out a much stronger value prop. It's a really good way to actually get more buy-in from your people. So completing an EVP, we do that through a series of interviews where people feel like they have a platform to talk about their experiences, to share. A lot of people after the interviews feels like, group therapy, especially if it's a focus group, about what's not going so well at the moment and what they love. And so it can also be a platform for people to feel heard and to get their opinions reflected in your broader message to the business. So yeah, it can be a wonderful exercise for also fixing, not necessarily for rebranding.
Yeah, and I guess an open question to all of you: has the last few years meant that actually EVP that has been already developed or maybe is in development has had to go, a fundamental recalibration with working from home and all that kind of stuff, and people considering leaving if, their employer doesn't feel flexible or they're demanding them come back into the office or anything like that? Is that a fundamental part of EVP that has changed, or was that always part of the aim of EVP to demonstrate that we're flexible, we want to help? Well, I guess it depends on the company, but has the last few years been quite a challenge for many employers to try and redevelop what their value proposition is along those lines, I guess?
Yeah, I'm quite happy to talk a bit to that, Ed, from the space we sit in, because I guess the journey we've been on to build our EVP happened back towards the back end of 2018, heading into 2019. So we were working on this piece pre-COVID. And we went through the process that Oscar's talked about. We went through a series of workshops. We went through some focus groups, and we gathered some really valuable information to help us shape our EVP. And we looked at some of the areas that perhaps were completely aligned and some areas that we might need to do a bit of work on. One of the things I think that stood out for us pre-COVID was that in particular as a law firm, we were really flexible, and we had a lot more flexibility than other law firms would have. The work-life balance was good. So that was something that was a great USP for us, and that was what we were starting to build on. Obviously, coming out of COVID, we're no longer standing out in that space. So that is something that perhaps isn't as prevalent. So we haven't completely ripped the piece of paper up and started again, because much of what was in the feedback at that time remains, but we have had to kind of look at toning messages perhaps up or down to make sure that it is still relevant. So yeah, I think definitely there has been an impact over the last few years, and certainly for us it has definitely had an impact on what some of our kind of core pillars would have been in our EVP.
I'd agree with that. Did you, Amanda, have you sort of chatted to people internally about that as well? How much has internal sentiment played on sort of what you're currently doing around that, on how much you're dialing it up or down?
Yeah, I think we've kind of moved on to do an engagement survey. So I think that's a really good sense check, isn't it? That the engagement survey you start off with is really aligned to the business you are, which is what we have done. And then we're kind of getting that feedback. And I think the feedback we're getting is really positive, that people are really valuing and really appreciating the flexibility. So they are still very much valuing it, but we know in the marketplace, we're not going to be massively different, because a lot of businesses have had to adapt how they're working. But yeah, it is absolutely, it is up there as one of the things that they really do value. Challenges around consistency in a large business, I think, are always going to be a challenge that you face. So getting consistency in how hybrid working actually plays out is probably one of the things that we will continue to work on. And I'm sure we're not alone in that. In other businesses across the world and across the UK, I think that's probably everyone's still finding their way with some of that stuff, but
Absolutely.
very much a valued part of who we are.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that internal side is like the most important part of it, because I think we've worked with some businesses that have come to us and said, we don't get it. We're offering our people sort of 4 days worth of like flexible working and working from home, and people are still leaving us. And that's kind of like, well, everybody's doing working from home now in some way or another. It can't really be your core reason now, but it definitely needs to be worked into your employer brand in some sense. Whether that goes directly into the core reason why you join a business, I'm not sure. I mean, for tech talent and for people that work in product, complete flexibility is a bit of a dream. So if you can offer that, then we've seen it doesn't like affect efficiency or productivity. So if you can offer that for that section of talent, then that is a big draw. But then you sort of have the follow-on question, which is, if you do that and that's a big part of your offering, then what does that mean for culture, etc. So I would say it needs to be a little part of it, but I would not advise making it your whole draw and your whole shtick, because we're kind of 6 months past that now.
So kind of on the the retention and attracting of talent, and if I can continue with my reductive line of questioning, can an EVP not just be replaced with paying people more? Like, you raise a lot of interesting kind of thoughts, which surely can they not just be solved with pay rises?
I think that's a conversation. If every C-suite sat down and was like, "Wow, I'll just pay our people 20k more," I feel like a lot of problems would be solved. Yes and no. So in terms of retention, we've seen, I think the largest that I've seen personally from doing a series of interviews at the current sort of state of play of the market, is that someone has gone to a competitor with the exact same job title and been offered 30k more, and that is attractive if you're a candidate. Like, we can't sort of dance around that and say, oh well, they're going in for culture, and no, they've gone because they've been offered £30,000 extra. That's understandable, but it's not practical. It doesn't solve all of your problems, and it's certainly not the absolute core reason as to why someone would stay with you. Because if the problem was always fixed by, we'll just pay them more money, then what does that really put the position of, like, how are you going to build a scalable culture around that? What does that mean for the assets that you put out through recruitment? What does it mean for how do you affect culture and sort of keep it on and create it in a way that you want to and guide people? It doesn't work. So when it comes to your actual offering, we've asked so often actually, is we pay people really well. Can we put this in our EVP and can it be a core part? And the answer is partially. It can be in the messaging, but because you're paying people well now doesn't guarantee that you're going to pay people well forever. It also certainly means that people aren't going to be happy with the amount that they're going to be paid now forever. And so you need to start to think about the business more widely and think, well, what is the draw? That might be growth opportunities. It might be learning and development. It might be about the relationships that they build. It might be about your managers and how much quality, how the quality that they are, and what that means for younger talent, or how you can work on digital talent. So it's certainly a part of it, and it's very hard to compete with it, but it should not be the thing that props you up. I don't think it solves a problem. It might solve someone's personal problem of thinking, well, why would I come to you? We'll offer you 20k. Yeah, I'm in. But in terms of how you're going to retain people, that's not the message that's going to get people to stay.
So what I'm hearing there as well is that an EVP needs to be a little bit more long-term and kind of sustainable as well.
Yeah, for sure. Exactly that, yeah.
And I think it's just to add to that point, what kind of really drives people. Each person's driven by different things. So yeah, money absolutely is a kind of an attraction point for sure. And I think most businesses are being challenged by the kind of the salary war that is currently going on, but not everybody is driven by that. And I think post-pandemic in particular, I think there is a lot of people who are taking it as an opportunity to stop, to sit, to reflect. And there's so much more to what people are looking for in a workplace. I think it's an easy assumption to make. I think there's absolutely a standard of living and a minimum expectation people will have, but I think there is a lot more to it. So I think there is a time and place at the minute with salaries, which are probably making that feel more of an issue. But my personal view is it won't go on forever, which goes back to that sustainability point. It can't be a bit of a short-term view on it. I think you've got to see a much bigger picture and a much longer term.
Yeah, I'd actually love to sort of like add an image to that, because that's such a wonderful point, Amanda. Is that if you sort of imagine that if we were in a physical room, this would be much better image. But if we imagine we were sort of like sat around a table and we sort of placed a mug or whatever in the middle of the table, it's quite similar to your EVP. Is that we're all looking at the same objects, but we're looking at it from different angles. So if I'm sales talent, then I might be thinking about how easy is the products to sell? What are my potential earnings? If I'm product, I might be thinking about what's the tech stack? How will I be working? What are my hours? If you are people, then you might be thinking about what is the growth trajectory like of this business, and what state is the culture currently in. If you're graduates, you might be like, what are the learning opportunities, and who am I going to be working underneath, and what are the relationships that I'm going to build? So it needs to speak. There's so many different roles and different kinds of people are looking for really specific different things. They need to be able to find that in your narrative. That's why it's kind of, when you land on something, it's like a hallelujah moment, because it feels like, of course, that's how we can articulate ourselves. So yeah, that's such a wonderful point, Amanda. It needs to speak to so many different wants.
I will to round it off, I will go down the list I have in front of me, Amanda, then Rich, then Oscar, and I will ask each of you to give me a sentence that you think, what is the best first step towards developing an EVP for a company that just has nothing at the moment?
So this is the quickfire round.
Yeah, quickfire round. So Amanda first.
Listen to your people.
Okey-doke. And then Rich.
Listen to your people.
Oh, there you go. It's developing a theme here.
I promise that was what I was going to say.
I was also going to say that.
Oh, well, that's easy then. So I'll name the podcast that. There you go. Listen to your people. Yeah, great. No, that's really good. It's good that we're all on the same page. And I guess all that's left for me to say is thanks everyone for joining us. So Liam, I think you might have the answer there. Listen to your employees. Simple as that. Indeed. Yeah, and managed to, I think Oscar had some really good answers to your incredibly cynical line of questioning.
It's not cynical. You can be skeptical of an idea. As they pointed out in the interview, EVP is a concept that has kind of emerged more predominantly in the last 10 years. So I think whether it was that accounting firm in Wales or myself with whatever company I've decided to start, people have kind of maybe valid skepticism, but I think Richard, Amanda and Oscar did a great job at kind of putting my mind at ease, and especially for companies where they can't just throw money at a problem, an EVP is definitely something that they should look into and develop.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you want to find out more, actually, Liam, about the future of the workplace or the workforce, make sure to read our Changing Dimensions report, which you should now be able to find at rwkgoodman.com/changing-dimensions. It's got some really good insights in there from many experts in the field of kind of employment, internal and external.
And we'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please do subscribe to it wherever you get to podcasts, and it'd really help us in the algorithms if you give us a 5-star review as well. And I think that's all we've got to say.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I've got left to say is just to reiterate what we said last week, which is welcome to all our Goodman Derrick colleagues after the merger that happened this week, as we are now RWK Goodman.
How very exciting.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
Bye.